Hi, I'm Tim Titus, Chief Technical Officer and founder of PathSolutions. I've been a network engineer for 30 years, so I have some experience in understanding how networks work, how communications works, security around that, and I'm going to go into and demonstrate how our new Security Operations Manager product works. So let's dive into the demo. Okay, I'm going to go to this new tab here called Risks. And what this does is it starts off with our dashboard. Now, the first use case I'm going to go through is, let's say you have a SIM or an IDS that says, hey, we have an alert on a bad user on an IP address. What you can do here is just search for that IP address. And as soon as you search, it's going to say a device with that IP address was found connected to the SARA Layer 2 switch interface 23. Okay, we can click here, and what it's going to do is it's going to show us the SARA switch interface 23, and we get to see what's connected there and say, okay, here's that device. It's associated with the default VLAN number 1. Here's the MAC address. And it looks like it's a Dell computer. We have the IP address. We realize that it's named Daphne, so it has a reverse DNS name. And we can do a mini port scan and say, well, what is this? We click connect. It's going to do a real quick check to say, is this device responding to Telnet, SSH, web, or HTTPS? Because if it is, we can immediately just click web and say, what is this? And find out what the web page is that's showing. So it's a very quick way of determining what a device is. Now,
is this Nmap what you utilizing for the port scan?
No, but you've given me a phenomenal lead-in. This is something we've built ourselves. You've given a phenomenal lead-in to the next button. This is full Nmap integration. So if you wanted to do a full Nmap to say, let's go and do a full deep dive, it's then going to do that and be able to say, here's the open ports, here's everything that Nmap can see. So it's integrated with Nmap. Now, in this case, you don't even need to do either of these scans to find out what this device is. Because the service running is part of Windows Active Directory, it's going to show a domain link if it determined that this device and this IP address is part of the Windows domain. And so in this case, we're going to say, no, it's actually a machine on the domain. You just click here on domain. We're going to query it and be able to say, okay, it's a Windows 2016 server. It's VMware. It's 2 sockets, 2 cores, 6 gigs of RAM. Here's the CPU utilization. Here's the free memory, disk I/O, network I/O. And we get to see the logged in users. Now, we realize Steve Winter is logged in here, and I'm thinking that person should not be logged in on this box. We can click on the user and see what they're a member of. They're a member of domain admins. So we now know that there's high risk with this user on this box. Okay, what are the processes? We click on processes. It's going to show all of the running processes on that box, along with the amount of CPU, I/O read, I/O write, and which user kicked off that process. So that if we go through here and say, hey, there's some suspicious processes that are running here and they've been run by certain users, it starts to add to the indication of compromise. Now, additionally, we might want to say, who is this box communicating with? You click on flows, and it's going to show all of the net flow information that associates with this box. Here we can see it's communicating with some server in Chicago. Okay, that's Salesforce. That's acceptable for this box. But it's also talking to some server over port 80 in England. Oh, Virgin Media. Okay, the person's streaming music. So we start getting a big picture of all of the communications that are occurring and what the risks are associated with these communications.
Quick question. The data is pulling about the from the workstation, such as utilization and all that kind of data. Is that all done via WMI or is it SNMP? Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So that's all WMI. So I'll say is all of this page is WMI. as we view the NetFlow information, obviously that's all flow-based. All of this, finding out where the device is connected, what it is, this is all SNMP. So it's really is with just the SNMP, with the NetFlow information coming to us and the WMI credentials, we're going to get all of this information put together to be able to answer these questions in one tool.
And does it store snapshots of the workstation data, or is that all real time?
So that's all real time. For the SNMP data here, this is all real time and historic. So you have the ability to go back and say, well, what happened earlier in the day? The NetFlow, again, you can go back and see what happened earlier in the day because we have historic NetFlow as well.
Quick question on the scalability for the WMI. How many devices can you support with a single box?
So because it's just a single query and we're not storing the historic on the WMI information, I'm going to say the scalability is almost infinite, because if it's in the domain, we're just going to go out and say, go query that box information.
Okay.
So let's say we've seen enough indication of compromise with the data that we've looked at to say, hey, this is a bad actor. We need to get them off the network. We can come back here to the General tab, and we have a control column, and we can say, let's shut down the port. And requires you to put in a comment of saying this is the reason, but at that point, it's going to shut down the port and thus quarantine the computer. One thing just to make you aware of is I'm going to go back to the switch level. At the switch level, you have all of the port control here. Notice that you can do shutdown to shut down a port. You can do enable to bring up a port. And then you have certain ports that are tagged as infrastructure. If an interface is tagged as infrastructure, it means that's a trunk port. That's a router interface. That's something that we will not allow you to control. You can thus only do this shutdown for individual devices so that you don't end up breaking your network.
Sorry, I have to ask, what is the gremlin section? That's funny.
So that's our correlation engine. That's more on the network troubleshooting side. But if somebody says the network glitched 15 minutes ago, you can drop this down and say, let's see all of the events that occurred 15 minutes ago. And this is going to show you interfaces that change status, devices that change status, interfaces or devices that had high packet loss or high utilization, so that you can correlate what happened at that point in time. And those sort of features we're going to talk about in the network field day in, is it August or September? I'm forgetting that one.
Networking field day 23 is going to be at the end of September. So it'll be September 29th, 30th, and 31st.
Okay, so if you want to dig more into those features, we got a ton of features, diagramming, mapping, all that sort of stuff there. But I'm going to steer us back towards the risks tab here. So footprint understanding. What we found talking to a lot of security experts is folks just don't understand the size of their footprint. They might say, gee, I'm responsible for a 1,000 node network, and they're not even considering the fact that they have a whole bunch of BYOD, they have a whole bunch of IoT, whole bunch of desktops that are hot stations for people to sit and work at. And so understanding how large the footprint is critical. Understanding how large your network is critical. So we give some understanding of that. Device vulnerabilities, this was that NIST checking that we do. And if you realize that within 20 minutes of deploying our software, we said, hey, do you realize you got 21 critical vulnerabilities? This ends up being surprising to folks because it really is within 20 minutes of deploying the software. We're going to tell you this stuff. You click in, it's going to show you, here's all your devices that we're collecting information from, and we've got a Cisco ASA here that's running 8.2 Rev 1. It has a critical vulnerability. You can click details. It's going to show you all of those vulnerabilities, including the CVE ID, the score, a full description, and the publish date. Now, if you want to learn more about the CVE, you can just click on this. This jumps out to NIST's website and is going to give you the full details, including the vendor advisory on how to remediate this.
They just released 12 new ones, so I guess the counters is pretty high on these devices at the moment.
It's that, and also we're running some old stuff on purpose in our lab. Our lab is actually kind of a little like a dog's breakfast, a little of this, a little of that, and we specifically don't go and upgrade because we want to find problems.
Sorry, you had mentioned this earlier, but how often does it reference the NIST database?
Every 24 hours. Okay, jumping back to the risks tab. So let's go through some exposures. So exposures are things that we have detected that are not necessarily good practices in the environment. So unencrypted protocol use, like your HTTP servers. You want to see which ones are running HTTP. You've got HTTP running on a whole bunch of devices here. You want to find out which devices have Telnet enabled. We're going to be able to look through and say, yeah, you got Telnet all over the place. Now you can choose to whitelist these. If you say, hey, this one's kosher, it's got to run Telnet, that's acceptable. But knowing where they are and knowing what protocols are in use are important. Something else that is valuable is if you're using something like OpenDNS or Cisco Umbrella, or even you just have your own corporate DNS and you're wanting to find out who's working around our DNS infrastructure. You can click on Uncontrolled DNS and it's going to tell you, here are all of the machines in your environment that are not using your corporate DNS. For example, at Daphne computer here, it's using Google. Okay, that's bad. That shouldn't happen. There's something here using 1.1.1.1. So making sure that your DNS is all using the same corporate DNS servers just allows you to prevent having those sort of problems with redirects and just going to incorrect locations. I'm going to jump over to the geography tab. So this is going to end up showing you where your data is going. So it's going to analyze all of your NetFlow information and say, did you realize that you've got 14 flows going to Nigeria? That must be that communications with that prince who's trying to send us all that money. We can click here and it's going to show us the information about those flows, including the country, the city, the location. So that's going to Lagos, Nigeria. We can see the ISP and we can see the machine that's sending it, and it's all going out via SQL. So we definitely have some SQL data exfiltration going on, and this is bad news. So being able to be aware of this type of communication and what's going on just allows us to say, let's go put some controls in place, lock this down, and then quarantine this computer because there's something definitely bad going on it.
Well, on the GeoIP, how often is that being updated? Because I recently found out that my IPv6 range was still located in the US instead of Europe. Give me some Netflix things.
So every 24 hours, we download a new IP location database. So I'd say it's pretty up to date. Now, another thing you can do with this is you can choose to say, this is just a flow source from all of our firewalls. If you wanted to say, let's only view the headquarters firewall flow sources or only the Sunnyvale firewall, so that you can say which firewall is finding these. That way you can say, is it coming from this location? Okay, there's two flows coming out through the Syrah switch. So depending upon if you have a multinational deployment, if you have multiple sites and you have multiple firewalls, you might want to say, let's see the flows based upon the firewalls to see where they're going. So you can do further filtering at this point. If you have a DMZ and you're wondering, is somebody knocking on the door of the DMZ, you can say, I want to view internal to external or just the external to external. So those flows going to your DMZ that never make it inside, you can say, where are these coming from and going to? Another way of looking at this is our chord view. So the chord view is going to end up showing you a volume of data. So it's again going to have the same countries here, but you can say, okay, so going from internal to France, there's only 2 flows. So you get to see that's a very slight volume of data. whereas going here from internal to the US is really a large portion of the data. So it allows you to determine what is the volume of data going to each of these locations. And again, you can do this for internal, you can do this for external, you can do this by firewall or by flow source. And again, if you click into one of these, it's going to show you the flows that match that. I'm going to jump over to the New Devices tab. So as a new device pops into the network, within 5 minutes, we're going to detect that and be able to tell you, here are all of the new devices in your environment. So I'll tell you, we actually created some new virtual machines recently. And we can see that those VMware machines are showing up right here. We have the MAC address, we have the IP address. We can say, well, what is this device? Can we connect to it? Can we Nmap scan it? So being able to determine, is it following the corporate standard? Is it using the proper firewalling? If it is, then we can say, great, we're going to approve this, get our stamp out and whitelist it and say, this machine is okay for being on our network. If it's not, then we can say, okay, let's go in, find out that the facilities department just put some new device on the network. Let's go walk up to them and said, yeah, I know you have this nice new Siemens controller that is sending the air conditioning information up to the cloud. I want to make sure it doesn't have a default password. I want to make sure that it's hardened. I want to make sure it has proper authentication on it. And so you can end up talking to them within 5 minutes of them plugging it in because you're discovering what's on your network.
Is there a way to add metadata with the assets?
No, that is a phenomenal idea. And I'm writing it down. No, thank you. That's a great idea that we should add, is for any time you have an asset that goes on the network that you can add notes, comments, responsible parties, that sort of stuff. So only makes sense, makes perfect sense. Thank you. You want to work in product management?
Just to go down the VMware path quickly for a second, is there any information regarding the specific host that might be on, if it's multiple VMs, or is that giving you the host information versus the actual VM information there?
So what we can do is we can end up finding out where that's plugged into the network and be able to say, here's the hypervisor connection as to where that is currently connected. So we're not going to dig into the hypervisor's vSwitch, but we can tell you this is the machine it's physically residing on. Last thing I'm going to cover is IoT. So we have IoT devices that we're able to detect in the environment and say, here's where they're plugged in. Also, here's the manufacturer. Here's what it is. If there's CDP or LLDP information, we'll be able to see some platform information here. But if, let's say you're wondering, what the heck is this? It's connected to the Muscat switch interface 23. It's a Hewlett-Packard device. You click on connect and say, okay, this is what it responds to. Okay, there's a web page it supports. Click on web. Oh, that's a printer. Okay. You want to see who it talks to, you can click on the IP address and make sure that this is only talking to approved devices. I have had customers where we deployed, they started taking a look at it and realizing that some of these printers are talking to things that they're just not comfortable with. They're sending data up to Salesforce. They're getting software patches not from Hewlett-Packard, they're getting software packages from their supply vendor. And so they figure the toner supply vendor shouldn't be doing anything with these printers other than maybe getting a page count, but that's it. So being able to be aware of who these guys are talking to can be really important.
I have a quick question. Two questions, but they're very simple. The last view you're on, it had Rogue IT. Is that like that tab? Yeah, and I think
yeah. My apologies. I should have covered that. So you're good for calling me on that. So Rogue IT, we're going to find infrastructure devices. Like if somebody drops a little Netgear switch in their office to say, hey, I just want 5 more ports. We're going to be able to find that and trigger an alert and say, hey, this Netgear switch, it's plugged into your barley wine switch, interface 10. And it was done 40 days ago. and you can say, okay, well, let's connect to that Netgear switch, make sure it doesn't have a default password or scan it, or let's just shut it down. User's doing something bad, shut it down. Or you can choose to whitelist it and say, hey, I put this switch out there, it's kosher, it's fine.
So how is that different than the new devices?
So new devices is looking for new end user devices, but if there's an infrastructure device, it's typically a little more critical because you're going to be either sniffing packets off of it, because effectively usually a hub is dropped in to end up sniffing packets, or a switch, you're going to span the ports. So it's usually a little bit more critical to have it viewed its own way.
Okay, no, that makes sense. The other question I had, which is because I quite like this, it's very lovely. Well,
thank you.
My question is about licensing. How is licensing done? Is this like per asset, per...
So in one sense, it's very simple, is you just count up the number of network interfaces in your environment. So tally up all of your 48 port switches, all of your router interfaces. So just the network infrastructure interfaces that we're going to be talking to, you total that up and say, okay, maybe you have 1,000 employees. You might have a 2,000, maybe 2,500 interfaces in your environment. We then take that count and put it into a discount bracket. That way the price is reasonable for any size organization.
From a flow standpoint, is it support JFlow, NetFlow, SFlow, or are there certain flows that are or are not supported?
So NetFlow, SFlow, we're verifying JFlow support at this point. So I'm not going to say immediately that we have JFlow support, but I will say that once we finish the verification, we will, which will be in another 2 weeks. So yes.
About finding these rogue devices, I mean, if it's a switch that doesn't have an IP address that you can connect to and doesn't have the credentials that you need to be able to query it, you won't be able to find it, right?
Incorrect. We're finding it based upon the MAC address. So it's not that we're getting into the switch, it's that we're saying, for example, let's say you have an all Cisco network and you say every device that's infrastructure on this network should be Cisco. Somebody from home takes their home firewall and plugs it in and says, aha, I now have an access point on the networks. And so that a Netgear access point drops into the network, we're going to be able to say, that doesn't belong here, and trigger an alert.
What's the frequency of update for that? Say we've got an IoT device that's connected to one access point and it moves over to another access point. How is it updating in there as far as showing us what interface we're connected to and so forth? Because I find trying to chase down ghosts a problem at times.
Yeah, so 5 minutes is our default polling frequency. We kind of recommend folks, you don't need to poll more often than that. It tends to be a good ability to scan and find devices within a 5-minute period.
I have a question regarding 802.1x. So for customers that are using that one, do you use also your product for finding, let's say, MAC authenticated clients that were maybe added to the network, things like that? Do you can discover 802.1x?
So we don't query for 802.1x. I guess I'll admit we haven't dug into that information yet because we haven't found enough folks deployed X. But your question is going to have me start wondering that might be a direction for us to go in the future, is to start looking at the authentication and see where do we have authentication failures and be able to trigger alerts like that. So currently we don't, but it's something we could actually easily do based upon the fact that we automatically collect a lot of network intelligence and analyze it. That's something we could actually add to our roadmap without a lot of difficulty.
Yeah, so with 802.1x, it's wonderful for all the certificate-based things, but then you end up with some devices that are just MAC authenticated, yeah? And then it is sometimes in a, I don't know, wiring closet, there is already printed down, use port 15 that has no configuration or so. That's kind of the gate for rogue IT, yeah.
Little post-it notes that are in wiring closets are scary.
Yeah.
Do you do anything around cloud service discovery? So, say customers using Dropbox or doing 365, et cetera, and have any way to do analysis around that?
So I'll say is on the performance side, yes. So cloud monitoring like Salesforce, that sort of stuff, yes, we have the ability to monitor the packet loss, latency, route path, stability of those paths. We don't have focus on security for cloud yet.
I would just recommendation that might be something be rogue IT related. Your approved cloud providers might be something to monitor for.
And
why does it say degraded when it's only 0.8%? That sounds a little harsh.
Oh, okay. So this health is the overall health of the entire system. So 10 interfaces out of 1,300 interfaces exceed thresholds of 90% utilization and 5% errors. You can set your own threshold and say, this is acceptable or this is unacceptable. So it's really up to you as to how you want to tune your network. And that goes more in line with network performance than network security.
Okay, thank you.
Can you have multiple pollers?
Yes. So if you have 2 data centers, you can have multiple pollers, one per data center, really however you prefer to deploy this. And again, because it's a very lightweight, fast deployment, it's easy to do that. You're not setting up a database server. You're not setting up separate web servers. You're not setting up a bunch of deployments if you don't want to.
Sorry, a question on that then, just related to the multiple pollers. So if I've got pollers in 2 separate data centers, but you were saying before that you're using SQLite as your data store, how does that data get back into the main data store? You have one.
So we're not actually we're not shipping data. We have an aggregation server that will bring the data together to form one UI, and it will go out to the individual separate pollers to get the information and aggregate it as you view it.
Right. Okay. So the data is stored with the pollers. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Circling back on the clouds, is there a way to download or digest the IP feed of the Office 365, which is published monthly, so I know which Office 365 addresses are being used?
So no, it does not pull a digest of that, and that's back. It's more cloud performance rather than cloud security, I suppose.
That way you can analyze which IP addresses are from Microsoft actually being used for Office 365, which is a trustworthy connection, which helps in your security insight for those companies that use cloud.
Okay. Good idea. So I guess finishing up, Rogue DHCP is going to be able to find machines that are handing out IP addresses illegitimately. If it is a legitimate DHCP, you can obviously whitelist it. Rogue DNS, you don't want machines handing out DNS addresses without control, so being able to see that is also included. And we also do have a blacklist download that we download every 24 hours with known Tor servers, command and control servers, spam servers, and we list that on suspicious communications. I apologize, I don't have any suspicious communications to demo for you, but it would show those communications here saying, hey, this is stuff that should not be occurring in your environment. And we can also trigger alerts based upon that so that you can know that it's, the shipping and receiving computer is talking to a Tor server, for example.
So 2 questions to that. One is, can I collect from my own intelligence feeds for those, or is it just something that you would handle?
So we're getting our feed from Firehall, if you're familiar. So that's the list that we're digesting every 24 hours to say, here are the known bad actors on the network. If you wanted to say, match this up and say, here is who is communicating with those bad actors, I think what we would do is we would trigger alerts on that and send those alerts into your SIM so that you have a rounded out picture of your client ended up having suspicious encryption activity going on the client, we're going to say, hey, this communication happened with a blacklisted IP address. You're going to have network utilization alerts that we're going to send that says, hey, this is communicating with a server in North Korea. All of these things come together in your SIM, creating all of that indication of compromise that says, yeah, you definitely got something bad going on here. So we can not only help you respond to SIM events, but also help enrich the data in your SIM by feeding those alerts into the SIM.
Okay. And then what's the second one? Shoot. I'll come back on the second one. I forgot it.
Sorry, I went too long.
I have a couple of just quick hit questions. On the network side, is IPv6 support?
So on the network side, we don't have a lot of IPv6 support. Our web server supports IPv6, but querying from the switches and routers, the SNMP stacks, that sort of stuff, we haven't found really strong SNMP support for the internal management IP addresses on switches and routers. Obviously, the major vendors have it. The minor vendors really haven't spent as much time on the internal management. And so it's a data richness problem is what we're dealing with the vendors.
Okay, and then on the sort of rogue shadow IT side of things, specifically around DNS, have you found efficacy a little bit diluted with the move towards DNS over HTTPS natively in browsers like Firefox, et cetera?
Yeah, and that definitely creates a whole new world of problems because, again, you're not following the corporate DNS standard. If, again, I look at it and say, gee, OpenDNS, Cisco umbrella, wonderful solution. Great solution because you have control. But if it's all being subterfuged or being fixed by the browser, and I wouldn't say fixed, fixed is the wrong word, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, there's a pretty split group on the security and IT side on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing if we can't see those DNS requests versus securing them, right?
Yeah. Again, if you want to take a look at this yourself, just go to www.pathsolutions.com/sandbox and you can play around in our sandbox. Take a look at the capabilities, the reports, or you can contact us and we'll end up getting you a full demo.